is Allison Markin Powell, and I'm so delighted to be here with Irina Sadovina to talk about her very first published translation, which by the time you're watching this, it will have been published in the US. It's called White Moss. Oh, sorry, hold it up straight. White Moss by Anna Nerkagi, which will be published by Pushkin, both in the US and the UK, which is where Irina is located. And we're so thankful to the San Jordi Festival to host us for this conversation. And thank you to Marianne and her team, as always. Welcome.
Hi, everyone.
So, Irina, where to start with this beautiful, wonderful book? I think actually, if you could just sort of, tell us about, where do you start with this book? When you talk about this book, how do you start start talking about it?
Well, there's so many ways into it. I think when people think of the far north, which is where the novel is set, or reindeer herders, or traditional indigenous cultures that are nomadic, it may seem like it's quite far away from the streets of New York, or the computer screens where you're watching this. But it's in some ways tale as old as time. At the beginning of the book, we meet Alyoshka, who's a young man, and he's in love, but his childhood sweetheart has not been around for 8 years. She left as a kid to go to the boarding school, which in the Soviet Arctic, there was the same system of boarding schools as there certainly was in Canada and I think in the US as well, and a lot of parts of the Anglo Empire, where indigenous kids were taken away from their families and had to live somewhere else, often, not allowed to speak their language and kind of forced to abandon their traditions and the familiar world where they lived. So this girl went off to boarding school, but would come back every summer and they would have this summer romance. And then she left and never came back at all. And so he is sad and full of longing and full of stubborn desire to wait for her. But everybody else around him, all of the older people in this reindeer herding camp, don't think it's such a good idea. And this is where the story becomes a little less familiar, where, if Alyoshka was having this problem in Sheffield, where I'm now, he could pop down to the cafe and meet somebody else. But he's in the tundra and there's not really many people to meet. It's very, very important that he meets somebody because if he doesn't, there'll be no children and the camp dies. So that's how I would invite people into the book.
Mm, right, right. And what about the author herself, Anna Nerkagi?
Well, the author, in some ways, has her life story overlaps with some of the themes of the book. So she was born in 1951, and when she was 6, she was taken away to boarding school. And I should probably have located us all geographically. I've mentioned that the book takes place in the Arctic and that it's the Soviet Arctic. In the past, or the book takes place over the course of the 20th century. It's if you can picture the Ural Mountains that divide Eurasia into Europe and Asia. So the Nenets, the reindeer herders in question, live on both sides of those mountains, very far north. So this is where Anna was born. This is where she got swept off into boarding school. And this is where she decided to study in the big city, or far south, actually, but still in Siberia. And this is, it's there in Siberia where she discovered that she's really good with words and started writing novels. But and so far so good, like it's the bright young indigenous thing, finding herself in the city, even though people tried to take away her culture, she reclaimed it, and now she's writing these books and telling the world about it. But unlike most people, at some point she just decided that's enough. I've had enough of this, and she goes back to the tundra and sets up a school for Nenets children in the tundra, It's a school that's still operational now. I've been there, and it's a place where kids can get kind of modern education, but they're also able to learn traditional life ways, and they're not torn away from their families.
Right. They're not like
So,
literally helicoptered off.
yeah. So it's you can really see her working out these problems. I mean, it's not a problem, it's this unimaginable rift,
Right.
just absolute pylon of tragedies that she has had to live through and seen other people in her community to live through. So she's worked it out for a bit in her novels, and then she moved back to the tundra and started working it out in pedagogy and in writing books for Nana's children. So that's her incredible arc.
It's amazing. And this book, White Moss, was written in 1996. Is that when it was published?
Yeah, it was published in 96.
So 30 years it took to come out in English.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. And this is the first book-length publication of a Nenets author in English. Is that right?
Yeah.
Congratulations. It's really wonderful.
Yeah. It's really meaningful and
Yeah.
exciting.
And so how does that tell us how you came into the picture? How did you find this book, and what role did you play in bringing it to this point where I'm holding it in my hands?
Well, it took a lot of people who are very passionate about this book for all the nodes to connect. This book did turn me into a professional translator. I encountered it when I came to Siberia for a very short-term teaching gig. This was 2020, 2021 in the summer. I myself am not Nenets. I do come from an ethnic minority community that is distantly related to the Nenets, but we have been settled for a long time, for centuries. And it's just a very different landscape, a very different climate, and different ways of surviving in the world. So it was quite just as surprising to me in some ways as it would be to someone who's even further removed from this world. But the place where I went to in Siberia is a city called Tumi. And incidentally, it's a city where Anna Nerkagi lived when she was learning to do her.
So that was her big city.
Yeah, exactly. And my first night there, I met somebody, and they're still my friend. And she gave me this book because we were talking about books, and I was explaining where I'm from. And she said, "It sounds like you will really enjoy it." And I read it in one sitting, cried, laughed, and was just so full of sorrow and love and relief and energy, because I have been thinking about these things for a very long time. Even though I'm not from the tundra, I have left in a place that's really, really culturally specific. And I also went back to that place and left again. And so, it's never as kind of clear cut, of course. But I have been negotiating. What does it mean to be from there, to be of that place? The village, the kind of tiny little subculture, a really, really small town somewhere in the middle of nowhere. To be from there, but also find yourself in this bigger world. And my parents have had to negotiate that as they both broke off from their villages and found each other in a city and had me. Both of them started speaking Russian in school. So they're bilingual, and I was raised bilingual as well. But whenever I try to talk about these things in the context of academia, which is my first career, I did 2 PhDs, one in Estonia and one in Canada. And both of them were in the humanities. And I was really excited to be part of those intellectual conversations. But at the same time, I felt that I could not really communicate about this um, this gift and this grief that is
Mm-hmm.
being at once pre-modern and modern. Because it was always, kind of folded into criticism, theorized.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter that, there's obviously a lot of people attempting to change that. But for me personally, I just felt that the whole structure was so inimical to being able to sit with those difficulties and to kind of untangle things really gently and to also patiently live one's life and see what other kind of wisdom can come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And this book, for me, did all of that.
Mm-hmm.
It is really, really patient, even as its many characters are often quite impatient with each other and with life.
Mm-hmm.
But the book itself is not single voiced, it's not single minded.
Right.
Yeah.
Many different perspectives. So would you say, going back to what you're talking about with this rift that you're describing in, that the author experienced, that you experienced, that your parents experienced, it's really, I think, very easy for that to resonate with most anyone, because so many of us, experience sort of this loss and the leaving and return. But would you say that, well, specifically what you were describing, it that the practice of translation, the act of of translation between and among these languages, that did that have any healing? Did that offer you any, help to sort of process what you're feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. I started translating this book, in the summer of 2021, and a lot of terrible things have happened since then.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes it feels like nothing but uh, really terrible things happened, and everybody deals with these things differently. I deal with grief and terror and upheaval by going inward, and I was really lucky that I had this book that could be there with me. I wasn't really sure if it would ever be possible to actually get it published, but going back to it and looking at these sentences really slowly and returning to the stories of these characters, it was a container that really helped. So yeah, so I did really benefit from doing that for a very long time.
Mm. It's, I mean, that also resonates for me, because I myself find comfort and solace in translation. When I can't bear the world outside, I can kind of go in and be with my books or my authors and their words, and it can be soothing. But can we then hear maybe from you, part of this book? You were going to do a reading for us, and maybe a little bit of reading in the original too, so that we can hear what it sounds like.
Yeah, I thought I would read from the beginning.
Great. Set the tone. So we don't really, you've already set us up for it. We're perfect.
Жгучей щепотью соли на зажившую рану стала для Пэтка свадьба молодого соседа. Дело жизненное нужно. Никакое самое сильное горе не должно останавливать бега жизни. Как валун, брошенный в реку, не поворотит ее течение. Вода обойдет его и вновь потечет, как было завещано. Scorching salt sprinkled onto a healing wound. That's how the wedding of his young neighbor felt to Petko. A vital, necessary thing. No grief, however intense, should stop the flow of life, just as a boulder thrown into a river would not turn its current. The water would move around it and keep flowing as was preordained. A year ago, his wife, the woman from the Lumdo clan, not quite old, had departed into the eternal night. Now there was no one to set the family tea table in the morning, no one to mend the boots, to start the fire. When a woman dies, she takes half of life with her, and then you begin to understand that the one with whom you have shared your days also takes away a part of your soul. Their tent, poles and reindeer hides, was placed on the sledge and left near the 3 trees, as then and it's called the spot where even centuries ago they would leave sledges that were no longer needed. As for old man Petko, he began living in his old friend Banu's tent on the vacant side. Living across the fire, old people would have said. In other words, not in one's own tent. Somewhere in some settlement or other, he had 2 daughters. The eldest had gone away a long time ago. Petko couldn't even remember when, but the youngest would visit often. How he and his wife had loved their daughter's summer visits. Like 2 old birds, they admired her from each side. Just as bird parents cleaned the feathers of their only chick, he and his wife had dressed her in the best furs their sledge carried. But the daughter always left, like a fragile bird that fears winter and flies off to warmer places. The Lumdo woman died in winter on a very cold day. Maybe that's why their bird daughter did not come to her funeral. Yeah.
Oh, so it starts, it really starts with grief, doesn't it? So, oh wow. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just need to like react. I need to, recover from the reading, but thank you. That was really beautiful, and I loved hearing it in the original as well. Um, phew. So, I mean, there's so many there. I have so many questions, and we have a limited amount of time here, but I might want to start with, you know, I heard you refer to this as the reindeer book, and I wonder if can you tell us the significance of reindeer to Nenets people and in this novel?
Yeah, that's certainly another way into the book. There is the story of Alyoshka, who's lost his love. There's the story of this old man who's lost a daughter and his whole family. And it's also a story of reindeer. So in the book, the reindeer are always around. And the way, the concern that people have with the reindeer is massive, existential, and philosophical. It's really about the responsibility for life itself. And even though a reindeer, like having a lot of reindeer is a good thing, obviously, you can take care of yourself, your family. If need be, you can take care of others if you have a lot of reindeer. But you also should not count your reindeer according to Nenet's custom, because that relationship to these animals as life that is more than numbers. It is not just about wealth that can be counted, and quantified. There's really this conflict maps in some ways onto traditional life ways versus modernity, but it's also a little bit complicated the way people have to navigate it. There's
these creatures that they live with, that they know, just the way that any farmer has a relationship with the animals that he tends to and slaughters as well.
Yeah.
So it's really
yeah. And I guess as nomadic people, the Nenets also relate to reindeer as transportation, as home. All of this. There's a scene in another novel of Nerkagi's where a woman breastfeeds an orphaned reindeer,
Wow.
like a baby reindeer, and it's it's just I mean it's love, creature to creature.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I just lost my thread.
That is quite an image.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of astonishing, really. But yeah, I think it's just all right. I'll go back to what I was. Well, I guess what I was going to ask you is, how did you learn? I mean, you must have done an incredible amount of research for this, like how much did you know about reindeer and reindeer herding and the tents that they live in and how did you handle that as coming to that as a translator for this book?
With a lot of paranoia and stress about getting things wrong. Yeah, I am not. I've never herded reindeer. If this was about cows or bees, I'd be fine. But yeah, this is not part of my skill set. And I
Mhm.
have done a lot of research. I read as many books about Nenets history and culture as I could. Um, I also looked a lot at various museum archives, uh,
Mhm.
like websites with kind of um, detailed descriptions of various sledges and parts of sledges and snow beaters.
Yeah.
And I still could there were certain things um, in the novel where I wasn't sure, like the information was contradictory or it was imprecise, or in some case I couldn't find anything. So when I got to go and visit
Mhm.
the tundra school where Anna Nerkagi works, I was really hoping to get my questions answered. And I
Mhm.
did get a lot of them answered, mostly not by Anna, who's
Mhm.
very busy
Mhm.
and doesn't really care that much about the fact that this book is out in English.
Okay.
Because she's got a different audience
Right.
now
Right.
and different concerns. Um, but I did speak to other teachers, especially one whose name is Nadezhda, and we've been in touch. And I've asked a lot of things about Nent's language, about specific types of sledges and parts of sledges, and types of tundra birds and tundra bushes.
Mhm.
Not all of it found its way into the translation. I did not want to kind of bog it down with all of this ethnographic information, which would just kind of I feel could push it into exotic territory or like
Mhm.
look
Mhm.
at this cutesy ethnographic thing territory. And this is not what this book is about. It's about
Mhm.
life,
Right.
capital L. Yeah.
Well, I think you were very successful in doing that, but I wonder if, I mean, it's like when I read it, I was just, at first it's really like you immediately create this mood with the language. And, you said it is polyphonic, as you said, there are many characters, and there are different voices for each character. And yet there is this sort of, like I said, there's this atmosphere of the novel. And I think it's really it seems like it must have been so challenging to maintain that throughout, but also with, like you're saying, all of these different descriptions and like how do you decide what to gloss and when to gloss, how to gloss, and how not to? Because it was clear to me, maybe because I'm a translator and I sort of, as a translator from Japanese, I face some similar issues and questions, and that's constantly evolving too. But I think this being the first book written by a Nenets author, there's probably most English language readers are not familiar with these practices. So yeah, where do you?
In conversation, um, definitely we've had a lot of conversations about this with my editor.
Mhm.
And I asked a lot of people. I made friends read parts, and in some cases, whole drafts of the novel.
Mhm.
Friends who don't know anything about the context, who don't speak Nenets, don't speak Russian, and it was helpful to hear them say, you know, oh, this is too much, or
Mhm. Mhm.
this could be like I don't need it explained in such detail.
Mhm.
But overall, I think it did come together fairly easily,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
because that decision has been made in the beginning. Like I knew that I did not want to. I wanted everyone to read it, not just
Mhm.
people interested in sledges. I should hope that everyone will be interested in sledges by the time we finish the
Right.
book. But let it be the gateway drug.
We'll all want our own pledge. Well, so okay, so that leads me to try and remember both of the questions that this leads me to. So one of them is about like you probably, if you, even if you were able to ask the author this, she may not have bothered or to respond. But like, what do you think? Who do you think she thought the audience was for this? Like, if she wrote this book in Russian, not in Nenets, like what was behind that? I'll let you answer that, and I'm going to try and hold the other question in my head.
Yeah. So I think her decision will become a bit more understandable if I explain the demographics of that part of Siberia where she's from. So up north, there's the forest Nenets and the tundra Nenets, whose languages are different. Below them live the Hanti, whose language is completely different, very
Mm,
anciently related to Nenets, but we're talking like very, very long time ago. Um, there's also the Mansi, who live, who are, there's not that many speakers left, but they still live kind of in that area. Then there's people who are primarily Russian speakers or only monolingual Russian speakers who live in that area and have always lived, or I guess their families have. There is a lot of immigrants, certainly right now, from the Caucasus, from Central Asia, who make their home in the region.
mm,
So I'm not as familiar with the demographics of the region in the 80s and 90s and
right,
70s,
right.
but something tells me that it was still quite diverse.
Mhm,
And there, if we look slightly outside that region, it's dozens and dozens and dozens of languages,
mm,
um, some of which come from a completely different or from many different language families. And a lot of these people would be reindeer herders, young
mhm,
reindeer herders, young
mhm,
people who went away to boarding schools and are trying to decide what to do.
mhm,
So I think people, when they think about um, nation states, they tend to assume that a particular language, like Russian or English for that matter, um, exists in society only to communicate like a particular thing, be it government messages or, Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and all the Russian classics. But it's actually like the whole spectrum, 360 degrees. All of life is represented. And a lot of people who are Russian speakers are multilingual.
mhm.
So, as a Mari speaker, I'm glad that she wrote this in Russian because I would have never been able to read it in Nenets.
Mhm.
I would not have found out about it. Maybe I'd know the name, but there's no entry point at all. And I don't know how long it would take for it to be translated.
Right,
So,
right,
yeah. So I think that's what she had in mind. But that's
right,
not who she has in mind now. And that's why she doesn't care about,
right,
yeah.
right. That's so, that's really, really helpful to know, though. Thank you so much for sort of giving us that picture. And it leads perfectly into my next question, which was to ask you, like, do you feel like knowing Mari, if it, I'm sorry, I always say that with the Japanese accent. Did that inform the way that you translated this book into English?
In some minor ways, for sure. So Nenets is a Samadaic language, and it's part of the Uralic language family. Mari is Finno-Ugric, but it's also part of the same family. So it's not that the languages are mutually intelligible, but the most ancient words, like tul or tu, which means fire, in both languages, are similar. And I mean, I don't really want to kind of make grand claims that some kind of linguistic intuition helped me with it, but
But it's not so much the intuition that I was asking. It's more the distance, I think, that you're just what you were just describing with sort of, all of these different multilingual people, in a general area, but also, throughout the entire Russian Empire, would be able to share it. And so I think it's sort of the distance between Mari and Russian. I wonder if that's sort of, if you were conscious of that as you were negotiating the distance between Nenets and Russian and English.
yeah, I see. Um, I think this multilinguality, um, that is really what I brought to this project and could see in it. So there are Nenets words in the book that are left untranslated, and you kind of figure it out from the context. There are a lot of cultural things that are unexplained, untranslated. It's assumed that as a human being, you'll be able to relate. And that is something that is familiar to me, that is natural, and I think is a valuable way of communicating, and is quite countercultural in in this kind of general model of culture where, um, there's kind of let's talk about the Anglophone world because this is where I'm bringing this book into. There is this cultural center that is mostly focused on itself, but then it's trying to reach out and kind of get stories from around the world to come into the center. But then it's very hard to make anybody care, as you would know. And then you make them care, and suddenly everybody cares. But in what way? And does it open more doors, or does it just kind of create a bunch of stereotypes? And there are so many anxieties around it. And I really think that it's quite refreshing for something to be like, well, here's a story from where I'm from. And I'm not going to explain everything, and I'm not going to tell you how to feel about all of it, but see if you can relate to that. That is how I grew up. A lot of my friends are back home, are multilingual. They may speak Russian and Mari, or Tatar and Russian, or Avar. I have a friend who's from Dagestan, and he speaks Avar and Mari and Russian. And there is this kind of looseness, and not so much anxiety, as what I have seen in academia, for example, to absolutely get it right, to only speak the most correct language and not speak any of the bad languages. You know what I mean? Yeah. Sorry, this was a little all over the place, but.
No. I think it's all part of this process. And I think I love what you say about, here is a story. And, it's really like you take it as it is. And I think it one would be hard pressed to not respond to this story. So I hope that everyone will be excited to get their own copy of White Moss when it's available. And is there anything else that you want us to know about the book or yourself or the author?
Well, buy the book, write to the publisher, start petitions for more Indigenous literature to be translated and published.
Yes.
And and enjoy the festival.
Yes. Yes. Thank you again to San Jordi, and thank you, Irina, for your time. It was really wonderful.
Thank you.